Hello, everybody. Welcome to HR Simple's webinar series, Performance Management Strategies, Finding Common Ground with Jamie Colligan with Kastner, Westman, and Wilkins, LLC. Now today, our course description is Finding Common Ground, which is an acronym that stands for Goal Setting, Risk Reward, Objectivity, Output, Understanding the Why, No Nonsense, and Determination. Now, at KWW, shareholder Jamie Colligan offers employers a practical and proactive approach to address and manage workplace performance by finding common ground between management and employees. During this highly interactive workshop, Jamie will integrate key legal and practical considerations that often arise when managers, supervisors, and HR professionals tackle performance discussions with employees. Over the course of her legal career, Jamie has learned that when it comes to workforce management, employers ultimately want the very best for their employees, and they also want to see their employees be successful. Now, to achieve excellent results, employers need to invest more time and attention to performance issues early in employment relationship and engage in a regular dialogue with employees along the way. Attendees of this workshop will learn best practices to identify and document performance objectives, shortcomings, goal settings, and when and how to have tough conversations with employees about subpar performance. Now, Jamie has spent her entire legal career at Kastner, Westman, and Wilkins, LLC, also known as KWW, and is involved in all aspects of the firm's employment defense practice, including employment litigation, workplace compliance, and traditional labor. In this role, Jamie regularly advises private and public sectors on day-to-day employment relation matters, including termination and leave management issues concerning ADA and FMLA compliance. Jamie also assists employers in responding to administrative charges before the EEOC, NLRB, OSHA, and other state administrative agencies. She also works closely with employers during and prior to litigation to properly manage electronic discovery and forensic data investigations. In addition, Jamie works with employers to update existing workplace policies and procedures, frequently presents on various HR topics through the firm's Rise and Learn series, and conducts on-site employee and supervisory level training, for example, leave management, sexual harassment, workplace conduct, and social media training. Jamie values her role in helping employers navigate the shifting legal landscape and strives to keep employers apprised on key developments in federal and state labor and employment laws. Now, Jamie's going to cover us on performance management strategies, finding common ground. Jamie, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Justin, for that nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be on the webinar with everyone today. We have, what I have found over the course of my career to be a fascinatingly difficult topic. No matter what organization you come from, industry, the size of your organization, this is always a challenging issue to manage performance, but it's a very important one, and it has some very obvious direct impact on the organization's success. So what we wanted to cover in the 1 hour that we have today, and I will tell you I have a couple of questions that I'll pose to the group on the call. We also have the ability, if you look at your box, you should see a comment or questions box, and you can raise questions throughout our session, and I'm happy to try and answer those as we go along. I understand that Justin will also make my contact information available to you after our webinar if you'd like to reach out to me separately. Happy to do that. Okay, so let's just dive right in and set some foundation for what we're talking about. Performance management in and of itself means to give feedback on how well people are doing their jobs. And everyone has a unique function, and we hope that their role is important. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the job in place. But not all methods of addressing and rating performance are created equal. What I have found is that while many employers have some type of measuring stick in place, we'll use that term for now, it isn't always clearly defined and it isn't always uniformly followed. And there's a very good reason for that. We get really busy sometimes, right? We all wear different hats and have different demands for our time and attention. And often what gets pushed to the bottom of the stack is the performance review, because the process itself can be very time-consuming and very daunting. Okay, so let's just keep establishing more foundation. And it's very important to understand why having an effective process to manage performance is important. And this would be universally true for everyone, regardless of what size your organization is or where you come from and what type of industry you're in. One thing that we have found with performance management tracking is that if you have good documentation and you have a good process in place, it makes it easier on management, the people that we're asking to administer this process, whether it's with or without the assistance of HR. And oftentimes, one of the biggest issues I have faced in my practice is you get a new manager in place and they've got a whole team that they are supposed to be reviewing, and they try to pick up the pieces and figure out where the last person left off, only there's no documentation, or it's pretty cryptic and difficult to follow. We want to have a well-oiled machine so that anyone could conceivably pick up the information, the files that you have, and know what the next steps are so that we continue to advance our employees along. Effective documented performance tools also create a script. So what do we mean by a script? When I say that, it's really talking points for counseling meetings. And these are meetings that happen periodically throughout the year as needed, where you may have to address performance concerns. If you have good documentation along the way that's taken while things are happening and while it's fresh in your mind, you don't have to come up with what to say because you'll already have notes to refer to. Here's another practical point that you want to consider. Effective performance management processes will help employees know where they stand. That is often overlooked, and I think we tend to get caught up in all of what is going on in our various organizations and our day-to-day grind, and we assume that people know how well they're doing. We assume that people know when we are dissatisfied with their performance, and we're not always right about that. You wouldn't believe how often there is a disconnect, and people need to be told. And the more direct we can be, the better. Okay, it looks like we have a question, so let me pause for a moment and see if I can read the question. Okay, well, the question is whether participants can have access to the slides after the presentation. I think we can do that. This is a Prezi that we're using, and we can make it available on a read-only link so that it wouldn't be changed or altered, and I will provide that to Justin after the webinar today. Thank you. Okay, let's keep going. Another factor we want to keep in mind here is to identify potential legal challenges. So this is an employment law attorney talking to you after all, but this is as deep of a dive into the legal analysis as I'm going to go today. We need to be well equipped, and we want to be well equipped to defend against claims by employees that the actions we're taking are for unlawful reasons. And, an example of an unlawful reason would be a discriminatory reason based on a protected class factor. And those factors vary depending on which state you are in. So we have federal laws and state laws that control that. And, when this is probably the best example I can think of, and it actually has come up twice in the last week for me. I pick up the phone and I have a client that's calling because they want to move forward with a termination. And they say this person, sales, for example, their sales have been subpar for a really long time. They're not really making the effort to improve. They're not taking advantage of training that we offer and other resources that are available to turn their numbers around. Okay, so what do you think I expect to see when I get that phone call in the file to support the termination decision? What I expect to see, of course, is a well-documented record of poor performance and poor sales results. Only what they'll send me sometimes, and in this most recent example that was the case, is a pretty thin personnel file. The performance review is a one-pager, and it has words like, great effort, good job, keep up the hard work in it. And it doesn't really coincide with this sense from the manager that the sales results and other performance was subpar. So in that case, if we move forward with a termination, that person is going to be left with this surprise factor and will not understand or have had an understanding all along that the performance was unacceptable. And that opens the employer up to risk that the employee is going to plug in some other reason for the termination other than a legitimate business reason, which is performance. Okay, so let's talk about the process itself. There are a ton of factors you could look at when we talk about rating performance. And I have seen these tools in many different forms over the years. Some people use a review form that rates you on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and each of those numbers has a legend that tells you what it means. Others have used different descriptors like acceptable, above average, below average, needs improvement, outstanding. And really, whatever rating system you use is fine. There's no legal requirement that it look a certain way. From a practical standpoint, what you want is something that works for your organization. You want something that every manager and every HR person who is tasked with picking the document up and filling it out, that everyone understands. And, sometimes I will tell you the obvious challenge that is faced is you have managers who have a very different understanding of what the rating system means. So effective training on the document and the forms that we're asking folks to complete is critical. So let me pause for a moment. I'm going to open a poll question for the group here, and we'll get some live results. Let me just go ahead and launch our first one. Okay, Justin, I think I may need your help with this.
Okay, no problem.
Not letting me do it.
Yeah, I'm going to launch the first one. Are you satisfied with your current performance management system? So you can answer yes or no for that. That'd be excellent. All right. Looks like we have about 82% of people voting here, and it's rising. All right. Last chance to submit your poll. We'll close it here shortly. Okay. There we go. All right, we're going to close the poll. Thank you very much for voting.
Okay, so the results are in. It's fascinating to see the breakdown here. We had almost everyone participate, and it's a very close call. 45% are satisfied, and 55% said, no, we're not satisfied. So, you know, I've asked the same question of different audiences over the last several months, and you know, this is pretty good, actually. You know, most of the time what I see is the majority of the room feel a dissatisfaction with their performance management system. Now, the system might work, or the system might be good, but the administration of the system may not be so good. So there's always areas that we can work on. Let me ask the next question. Justin, can you launch the next poll question, please?
Yes, I will launch the next poll questions. What type of performance management system are you currently using? We have a few choices here. If you could please select A, B, or C. And we'll keep the poll up for a few more seconds. All right, we're going to close the poll here. Get your last vote in. All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, so I think these numbers are more along the lines of what I've seen before. 63% are using the annual review, and that's what I would regard as the traditional performance management tool that's been around the longest. 27% are using something else, and 10% aren't using anything. Believe it or not, that is an option. It is an option. Now, it may or may not be working for all of you. Maybe some of what we'll talk about today will spark some interest. Okay. Can everyone see my screen now?
I could see your screen. We're still on a list of areas that employees could be evaluated.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here we have some terms that may or may not connect with each of you. These are pretty standard tools and factors to look at. But you know, I told you at the beginning, there really is no one-size-fits-all approach, and I meant that. There are all different ways to streamline the process. Let's say you don't want to look at all of these different areas, but you have maybe 3 or 4 criteria that are most important to your organization that you've identified, and you want to have a simpler process for measuring how well people are doing. Okay, so let's compare and contrast the annual review process, what goes into that, and some of these alternative methods that I am hinting at. What goes into the annual review? Certain key factors. Some of these are going to be very obvious, or at least it will sound obvious, but we often find that they are missing. We have to identify the person's name, what their position is, who they report to, whether it's the direct supervisor who completes the review or not, and the period of time that's being reviewed. That's absolutely critical. So just listing the date on the performance review document that it's delivered doesn't necessarily tell you very much if you're trying to look at this years down the road to figure out what measure of performance we're looking at. We want to give our supervisors and managers some direction on how they should be completing these. So we don't just hand them the forms and say, there you go, read it and fill them all out. We want to be very clear. If there is some explanation that's needed for the terminology, and the factors we're reviewing. We should give that messaging to supervisors. We want to be telling supervisors and managers how often we expect the forms to be completed. Do we expect them to be prepared electronically, handwritten? Do we want drafts to be sent to HR or to some upper-level manager for review ahead of time? Is there a requirement that you attach supporting documentation to the reviews? Do you have to schedule the meeting with the employee a certain period of time in advance? Is there a self-assessment component to the review process that needs to be considered and the timing of that? And the list goes on, but some of this is just very practical and it's very often overlooked. I hear this from managers all the time who have either worked their way up the ranks or they come in from another organization and they're just handed some documents and they really don't know what to do with them. So here are some components to even the traditional performance management process that often accompany the annual review. Informal coachings, or you could call them counseling sessions, whatever fits your organization. That's where you have a conversation with someone and you say, hey, look, we've got to pick this up. Either your pace isn't good enough, we're not seeing the results, the attention to detail that we need to see, whatever the issue might be. What goes along with that might be part of a progressive discipline system with oral or written warnings. We could do incremental evaluations, and I'm going to show you an example of one of those here in just a couple of minutes. Now, if things are not going the way that we hope and the performance is not cutting it, I often get faced with the question, well, when is it time? When have we reached the point that we can terminate? And there is no magic rule of thumb with that. You don't have to wait, at least not under the law, a certain number of years or bad reviews, but you certainly want to be as open and transparent with the employees as possible. And what I mean by that is we not only need to tell them that the performance is unacceptable, and we want to be very direct and clear about that, but we also want to make sure that there are no surprises. This is what's going to happen if you do not turn things around within X period of time. A performance improvement plan, or we often call them PIPs, is one way to do that. You're delivering a very direct message with objective improvement criteria within a certain period of time, whatever you set that to be, and you tell them what will happen if they do not turn it around. This last one, the last chance agreement, is very similar to that. The last chance agreement is saying, and you can see this even outside of the performance context as well, these are agreements that the employee signs and recognizing that if I ever do something like this again, so let's say I get the pricing wrong and it ends up costing thousands and thousands of dollars in wasted labor, and it jeopardizes a key customer relationship. If I ever fail to follow instructions from my supervisor and make this sort of mistake ever again, I understand I'm going to be terminated. It's very clear and direct. So one of the items that I mentioned was the incremental review. One of the downfalls, I will say, and I know the majority of the folks on the call today are using this method, the annual review method, is we see managers wait until the week before reviews are due to start filling them out. And that creates a lot of risk in the sense that they're not going to be comprehensive and accurate, because who can remember what happened all year long at the tail end? You know, we tend to see only a small snapshot of time, and it's really the most recent events that the manager's remembering. So the fairness factor tends to go out the window. If we don't have a system in place or the manager isn't organized enough to keep track all year long consistently throughout the entire review period how well the person did. If that's happening, an annual review can be a very effective tool. But we need to watch out for that and make sure that we have systems in place so that this is consistently happening. There's different ways that the manager can keep track of this information. One thing I've seen is either electronic or even physical folders kept on each direct report, and the manager can make a note to themselves. I've seen people send emails to themselves with a quick summary, make an electronic, like a voice message note on your phone that sends it to your email or to the folders you have created with a note to file. So-and-so did great today, put in the extra effort, really appreciated that. And so it's a good way to capture both positive and negative performance examples throughout the year. You can also keep track of when there are some of these informal verbal conversations about performance so that we aren't at the end of the year and the manager is sitting there thinking, well, I know that I talked to this person about this issue like 3 or 4 times, except it's not documented anywhere. So it never happened, at least not from the employee's standpoint. So let's transition to maybe some alternatives. This first one I'm calling a periodic check-in meeting, but you could really give it any label you want. This is an alternative way of measuring performance, and it could be either a supplement or replacement of the annual review process. I'm going to show you an example of what this might look like. And again, these are adaptable. You can change this to fit your needs. So here's one of the documents I'm thinking of. I'm calling this, we've got the KWW label on it, but it's a document that would have, a to, from line, the date, the check-in meeting guide. This part should come from upper level management or HR to the folks that we're asking to complete these check-in meeting documents. You want to give them clear instructions. So I'm calling this general policies and procedures. And we're telling managers and supervisors, hey, look, we want you to track performance regularly while information is fresh while it's happening. So we call that contemporaneous records of events that happen. I'm giving you a term, employee observation log. That's the folders that I referenced before, where we're keeping track of everyone under direct supervision. So in this example, we're telling them this is how you should keep track of it. Keep a record of what is significant to you and include both positive and negative observations. We want to keep all of this separate, so keep it filed away by direct report by employee's name so that things don't get mixed up. And we look at factors including the performance, attendance, attitude, whether they are promptly and timely meeting their deadlines, the quality of their work, the ability to meet the goals, and the list goes on and on. You could include a component where HR would periodically review these logs or folders that are kept, which I think enhances the accountability factor with management, and it ensures that they're going to keep up with it. And then we're asking them to actually conduct the check-in meetings with the direct report. So here's what you have in mind. A check-in meeting is not necessarily an hour-long meeting like you might envision the annual review process to encompass. A check-in meeting could be a very short meeting. The idea is not to address every single aspect of performance or every aspect of the job. You pick select issues, whether positive or negative or some combination of the two, to talk about. You give the employee an opportunity to weigh in with any questions or concerns, And then you build from previous check-in meetings. So last time when we got together, we were talking about your desire to learn this new program. What efforts have you made in the last 3 months to learn the program? How is it going? Are there more resources that we need to make available to you to help you along in that respect? And you would actually document this. So, you know, on page 2 and 3 here, I'm showing you what the technical document could look like. We're tracking the employee, the manager, supervisor, our date, the title, and part of the log that we're creating is going to encompass the previous check-in meeting notes. So we would expect that there would be some reference to those. You might pick focal points, some open-ended questions instead of a rating scale here like you may be used to. You know, this first question, is there anything we discussed at our last check-in meeting that you want to continue talking about? That gives the employee an opportunity to weigh in and to engage in an interactive dialogue. So at the very beginning, and we'll cover these again, you know, the title of our session today is Finding Common Ground. And, you know, the G.R.O.U.N.D stands for some really key factors that go into this process in making it successful. One of those factors, understanding the why, includes some engagement. Okay, we want to make sure that we're on the same page and that the supervisors and managers are being clear and that they understand where the employee's coming from, and then vice versa. The employee needs to understand the goals, the expectations, and how that fits into their role within the organization. Okay, other examples of open-ended questions you might ask, are there areas you are working to improve? Is there anything you need from me or the company to meet your career goals? How is your team doing? This is a question designed to identify whether there may be some interpersonal issues going on or conflict on the team that needs to be addressed by the supervisor and manager. That's an added bonus to having these more regular discussions. You know, if you're not already paying close attention to how things are going, it helps supervisors stay up to date with potential conflicts that need to be addressed or sent over to HR. We ask, what challenges have you faced since the last meeting? What solutions have you identified to overcome these challenges? And then lastly, what has gone well? Now, you know, you may have figured this out on your own, but the way these questions are phrased, it really has embedded in it this accountability factor. We are asking for buy-in from our employees. So it isn't just management dictating what the expectation is. It is the employee helping to identify and agreeing and buying into the dialogue where they recognize this has gone well and this hasn't gone well. That gets you one step closer to the D in our Finding Common Ground, determination. Are you determined to turn it around? Okay, so I'm going back to the first page of this document to help break down how this process works. And in step 1, manager, supervisor, and preparation, we are giving clear instructions to managers and telling them you need to be prepared before you sit down with your employees. And, you know, we want you to give some thought to what you put on this form and what you really want to cover during your meeting. And the best way to do that is to refer back to your folder, your working folder, your observation log, because those notes provide you with the script you need to get ready for the meeting. In step 2, we want to tell them how to conduct the meeting. We want to give them some direction on the focal points, the lists, and how the conversation should go. Now, the last piece here is the follow-up. So we say to managers, put a copy of your notes in your observation log. And this is a nice reminder coming from upper level management and HR to tell them, if anything comes up during this meeting that you don't know how to respond to, that you think might require an investigation, or that requires further review, you need to alert HR or upper level management right away so that we can do something to address it promptly. Okay. So this is just, again, one example of an alternative tool that you can use to effectively manage performance, which I'm calling the check-in meeting. I'm going to just take a quick pause and check to see if we have any questions. Okay. I'm not seeing any on this.
Yeah, nothing yet, but feel free to ask Jamie any questions throughout the webinar, and we'll try to answer them.
Okay, let's keep going. So the supervisor logs, we're still in the alternatives. The supervisor logs could be part of this check-in meeting process. They could also be part of the annual review process, where we just keep very detailed logs. So essentially what we're identifying is a way to train supervisors and managers on effective ways to track performance during the year, so that at the end of the year, or whatever month you set within your organization to conduct these reviews, they're not scrambling at the last minute, and it's a far less painful process. Another tool that we look at is the electronic data, the computer-generated production data. This is also, another way of looking at it is the objective criteria. So if you're in sales, your production results, or you're on the phones and you track customer complaints, and that's a big tool, and how much downtime do you have? I'm thinking of telemarketing, for example. There are tons of different ways of looking at this information, and that might be something that you refer to. I have actually seen examples of employers that use nothing other than printed production reports, and they have the manager sit down and they find the employee number and they go through all the different columns, and they say, look, where we're supposed to be and the expectation. You either fell short or you're doing a good job. Let's keep up the good work and figure out how we're going to get the numbers up the next time we sit down. So that's another way of doing it. And I have seen a mixed set of results, whether some employees actually prefer that because they can understand it and get behind it, whereas others want more of the dialogue, and they want the factors that you see in the traditional review process. So let's run through some common mistakes that we've seen in the performance review process, regardless of what system you're using, and some of them have come up already. So the first one, of course, is not training our supervisors who complete the evaluation. We have to give instruction so that they know how to do their job effectively. This is a good one. Evaluating employees who are generally good employees favorably, and the folks that we think are bad employees, they get evaluated poorly in all measures. So really what we're talking about is the supervisor or manager allowing a bias to come into play in how they're looking at someone's performance. So rather than looking at it on a consistent basis for all the direct reports, the people we like, we rate higher. Or maybe it's not somebody that we like or favor in that respect, but it's someone who actually really tries hard and they're dependable and they show up to work. Their results could be very comparable to someone who I think isn't trying as hard as they should and doesn't always have the greatest attendance. And because I'm a little bit more irritated with the person that I know isn't working as hard and isn't always as dependable, I may tend to rate them lower, even if all other things are equal. So we want to try to enhance the consistency factor. Here's another one, intermediate performers. Not everyone is doing exceptionally well or exceptionally bad. There are the middle ground folks and all levels in between. So this comes down to me as I'm looking at this factor, honesty. You know, be realistic and honest with yourself about how well people are doing. Giving employees the benefit of the doubt is another factor. So, you know, it's not so bad right now. They're probably mediocre in all categories. So I'm not going to work really hard to closely evaluate someone in all the categories. And I'm probably just going to give them a 4 out of 5. We had a bang-up year. Our numbers are really good this year. So it doesn't really matter if they fell short in some of these categories. There's no need to come down on them hard because overall, as a company, we did really well. We want to avoid that mindset. Here's another factor and common mistake. Rating employees based on past performance evaluations. Now, that may sound inconsistent for a moment with what I told you before, that we want to be referring back to other reviews. We absolutely want to do that because that's how we can track how long we've been telling someone to work on certain areas. But what we don't want to do is start at a certain level based on someone's exceptional review from the year before. So let me give you an example. If you're using an annual review and the overall rating for an individual is a 4.5 out of 5 in 2017, when it comes time to do the 2018 review, we don't want to start with an assumption that they're going to be at a comparable level. If they have fallen short in some areas that they scored high in last year, they need to be realistically rated at what their level is for this year. And so, and that works both ways. Where you have someone who has a very bad review the year before, if you see even the slightest bit of improvement, don't give them all 5s, because that is not accurate and it doesn't reflect reality. So this one we covered, where the evaluation only covers the review time as opposed to the full measuring period, and we've talked about ways that we can avoid that. Here's a good one, common mistake. You have statements written in the review and we don't know what they mean, or we don't know if they're a positive or a negative, because you know, with this one, Edward employee has tried all year to meet our production standards. How many of you can tell whether that's a good thing or a bad thing? We can't. We have no idea. Now, I bet the supervisor who wrote that down knows what they meant by it, and they probably are very close to either their personal impressions or some documented examples that go along with that statement. But if you were to pick up the file as a new manager who takes over the department, or even the same manager a couple years down the road, if we had to defend a discrimination claim, for example, and we fired the person for performance problems, we won't know what that means because no one's going to remember. And so that is not a very clear record, and that's not what we're striving for. Here's another common mistake. Verbal counselings, and I see this when I train on how to effectively discipline as well. Verbal counseling should be documented. Now, you don't need to have an employee's signature on a verbal counseling, but you need to have a written record that the discussion took place. And that can look any way you want it to. But we want the time and the date, the full date, month, day, and year when the issue was addressed and what expectation was set so that we can refer back to that. Okay, here's another one. Not allowing employees to comment on their evaluations. And this may come up in the discipline context as well. Not allowing someone to offer their understanding, their insights, is very detrimental because, the communication process breaks down. We have no idea whether they've understood what we've said. We don't receive information and deprive ourselves of some useful information that might otherwise help improve the performance. So this is a really critical component to the review process, no matter what performance management system you want to use in your organization. Okay, so what I'd like to do is review the common ground factors, and another way of looking at this is best practices and takeaways from today's session. Again, ground is goal setting, risk reward, the objectivity and output, understanding the why, no nonsense, and determination. So let's go into goal setting and what we mean by goal setting. We're trying to create an action plan. So we're sitting down, whatever our review period is, to talk about your performance and how it measures up at this point in time. But we also need to look ahead into the future. So what's the objective? What areas do you want to work on? Do you need to work on? Do we need you to work on as the organization in the next review period? We want to be very clear and direct when we're doing this. Because, the idea is not to trick people. There shouldn't be any mystery behind what we're telling everyone. We want you to understand what we expect of you, and we want to understand from you what you need from us to be able to perform at the level that we expect. If we're dealing with performance management problems, so it's not good, then we want to tell you and employees exactly what is going to happen if they don't turn it around. You should always offer to provide resources and assistance. And, that is only going to serve your own interests as a company, as the employer. You want to be very clear, to the extent that you can, about time limits. How long are we going to give you to improve? And I get this question all the time. Well, how long do you have to give them? There is no set time frame. But what you want to keep in mind is it should be something that can be delivered. So if I am going to put you on a performance improvement plan and I give you 10 days to turn it around, I may be setting you up for failure, and that's probably not realistic. And so the person will be left with this feeling and sense that it was unfair to begin with. And, even outside of discrimination claims that could arise, you might get an unemployment claim if someone is fired for performance. And they're going to say that there was no just cause. And I understand that the standard is very different from state to state in how unemployment claims are administered. But it's almost universally true that you need to give people notice. And if there's no policy they have violated, legal obligation, or some other really extremely egregious example of misconduct, they're going to win unemployment because the agency is going to say you didn't have what we call just cause to terminate the person. It doesn't mean it was unlawful, but it would make them eligible for benefits. And, that matters. It affects your premiums. And depending on what size your company and your business is, it may affect you more severely. Okay. So let's talk about the risk and the reward. Now, as I see it, the risk and reward, it's twofold. If you are effective in the way you administer your performance management system, again, whatever it looks like and consists of, it's going to serve the interests of your employees and the business. Now, if it isn't done effectively, or if these goals that we have set are not met, you're going to see the opposite effect and the negative impact on the organization and the employee. So one of the factors we look at, and it really becomes critical, is accuracy. And that's how we defend, and that's how I have defended clients time and time again who are accused of having some, we call it pretext, but unlawful basis for moving forward with a demotion or a termination. And it's how we can identify, the more accurate we are, we can look back on these records and they're reliable and credible. On the consistency side, we need to break this one down and think about it in terms of timing. So are we meeting with everyone consistently during the time intervals that we have set? And again, I recognize everyone gets busy. I do hear that often. And we'll start seeing, oh, yeah, we review everyone in January, and the one person whose performance is really, really bad doesn't get their review until mid-February for the year, and they get terminated at some point that year. They're going to point to the process and they're going to say, my manager wasn't telling me how I was doing. It was unfair. Everyone else got a review but me in January, and I think that they were just trying to manufacture a reason to fire me, to mask this unlawful reason. So we want to put ourselves out of that equation because it is just a mess. We also want consistency with the evaluation standards for everyone. If you're going to set different factors or standards, whether it's the numerical system or the other descriptors, we need to make sure that we are consistently using that terminology with everyone. And then the last piece to this has to do with raises and bonuses. And I have found the trends have kind of been all over the map. Not everyone is tying performance reviews with raises and bonuses anymore. Sometimes those are made separately, those decisions. And so it is not universally true that everyone has an automatic matrix for raises and annual bonuses. Our next factor, objectivity and output. So the first piece to this is subjective versus objective criteria. 9 times out of 10, the objective criteria is going to be your best ally. And what I mean by that is if you have specific goals that you've set, numerical goals, either they hit them or they didn't hit them. There's no in between. So what you're listing on the review measures up with what we set as the goal or the expectation. The subjective factors may be observations in terms of effort and successes along the way that employees could challenge. Now, I'm not going to advocate that we do away with them altogether because they can be very helpful in developing someone, and they may also be very important to the nature of your business to have the subjective factors in there as well. But what we want to do in order to get the right level of output is avoid what I call difficult to define criteria. I don't really understand what I'm measuring. So, here's a comment that I've seen. Work harder. If I pick up a review and I see that phrase in there, I don't really know what that means. What are you telling me I need to work harder on? How can I work harder? I need to understand that. And lastly, we want the review to coincide with the person's job. So the job description, if there is one, or the role and the responsibilities of the individual. Are we rating them based on what their job entails or some extra stuff that we've added along the way? We also want to regularly track and carefully track improvement. So there's two components to this. Whether you are working to improve, so did we see improvement, but is the performance satisfactory or not satisfactory, even with the effort to improve and go on the upswing? This all has to do with providing very clear, direct statements in the reviewing document. Understanding the why is our next one, and I touched on that briefly before. It has to do with getting on the same page between managers and supervisors and their direct reports. We want you to understand our goals, expectations for you, the needs of the organization, our culture, the direction we're heading in, and then vice versa, if you buy into that and we hear from you in terms of what you need to be able to accomplish what we are asking you to, we've reached an understanding. We're getting to that common ground. The no-nonsense takeaway here is really exactly what it sounds like. Be direct with people. Don't beat around the bush. And you know, there are some supervisors and managers that tend to say really nice things in all the reviews, and they shy away from telling someone when their performance is unacceptable. It's a difficult statement to make to someone, but it serves no one's best interest ultimately to not be as direct as you possibly can be. Okay, and our final factor is determination. We need to see the buy-in, the agreement from the employee to turn things around, to meet the goals and expectations, and to fulfill the needs of our business. And the same commitment, a commitment is another word, from management to follow through on providing the resources and the regular and accurate and constructive feedback that our employees deserve to hear. Okay, and with that, I've come full circle and shared with you how you can find common ground with employees in measuring performance. And in our last few minutes, I'd like to open this up for any questions from the audience.
Yes, Jamie, thank you very much for that. Performance management strategies, finding common ground. I know for me, when I was an employee, and still am, but performance evaluations are key. And like you said, not just saying, hey, good job or work harder. You need to define your key terms, right? You need to go into it. And of course, all these steps. So I know later on we're going to email all the attendees here with a link to a read-only for these slides, and we'll also provide Jamie's contact information so you can ask further questions. But we do have questions open now for a few minutes, so if you have one, you can type it in here and we'll try to answer it to the best of our abilities. If there are no further questions, we can end the webinar, of course, but we'll give it a few minutes and see if anybody has anything. So looks like we have one coming in here from Dana Smith. Should attendance logs be included with the performance evaluation?
Oh, thank you for that question. Almost always, I would say my answer is yes. Attendance is one component of performance. So, you know, whether you attach the actual log, I don't see any downside to that because it's the objective supporting document, if you will, that supports the reviewing manager's statement that attendance has been unacceptable. You give them the screenshot that shows, hey, look, you were late 4 days in a row. And the only time I would say, or the only word of caution is if you have protected absences for like protected leaves, whether it's an ADA accommodation or an FMLA leave or some other approved absence, we want to make sure that we're using the accurate attendance records to point to in that conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you very much. Hope that answers your question. If you have any others after that answer, feel free to ask. And We'll keep the panel open a little longer here. I know Jamie, oh, looks like we have another one from Gene Klaus. I have found that the outstanding performers continue to be outstanding after their evaluation, but what are your thoughts on a non-contributing employee? Do you find that the process does not motivate them?
Okay, so how do we, I think this question really, what you're asking is how do we try to motivate or engage the people that are struggling? And with the annual reviews, do we wait until the next year to do that? Here's one method that I have seen work effectively. Beyond just telling someone that they haven't done well this year, we ask them to identify specific goals and ways that they're going to improve in these areas. And then, even if we are only using an annual review, we create additional opportunities to come back together with the people that are struggling and tell them how they're doing. And it only serves the employer's interest and the employee's interest to do that. It's a little extra work for management, but if there's any motivation, it's hearing the same message again. And if people care about their jobs or need their income, they're going to do something about it. And if they don't, then we can at least look ourselves in the mirror at the end of the day and know that we've done our best and tried all that we can to help people improve.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie, how are we doing on time? Looks like it's 1:01 in your time. You have a few more minutes for questions? We could keep
Sure. Yeah, I could hang on the line for a few more minutes if there are other questions.
Excellent. I don't see anything coming through, but we still have a few attendees, so hopefully we have some folks coming in. Please ask some questions if you do have any. Now is the time.
Well, I'll answer a question that I didn't see come through, but I have been asked fairly recently, and that is, which method do I endorse? And, I have to confess that, my firm actually uses a couple different types of performance management tools depending on the nature of the position. So we have a very extensive annual review document that includes a self-assessment for attorneys. And then our staff, who are not measured by the same criteria, have a different review document, and we have something more comparable to the periodic check-in meetings that I described. And so, that's another point to consider. Which positions are we reviewing, and do we want to use a single method for everyone, or do we need to mix it up depending on the nature of their role? Some people break it down by managers and supervisors. Some people break it down by hourly versus salaried positions. It's whatever works best for your organization, but it's something to be very intentional about.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great question and a good method there, Jamie. Thanks for bringing that up. Looks like our questions have ended. That will be the end of the webinar. Jamie, thanks for coming out today for Performance Management Strategies, Finding Common Ground. We will send everybody an email with the link to the presentation and Jamie's contact information. Once again, thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.